Everyone may be seated. We are ready to proceed. Mr. Goldman.
Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I passed the
I'm sorry,
witness.
Miss Anderson. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yep, done, pass the witness.
Oh, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, my name is James Stanton. I'm the district attorney for Wise and Jack County. You and I have not met before today, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm just going to ask you a very few questions here.
Okay.
And we're going to let you get out of here, okay?
All right.
The last time you would have seen the defendant, Tanner Horner, would have been 1992?
Yeah, I would. You want me to think of years? Hold on.
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions. Maybe I can help you with that.
Okay.
You said here the last time you saw him, you were 10 or 11 years old. Is that right?
Yeah. About 11, 12 was last.
Hypothetically, if your birthday was in 91, right? You were
Yes.
10, 11 years old. And the last time you would have seen him, that would have been, excuse me, if your birthday was 81, you would have
81.
seen him in 92 or 93.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that accurate?
That's about accurate. Yes, sir.
So that's the last time you physically laid eyes on him was in 1993?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that all that you did as a 10 or 11-year-old was babysitting?
Yes.
And all of your memories and things that you're being asked about today, about his communication skills, all of these other things you're asked about, that's from 1993.
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this. You indicated a little bit here that I think you said you had wrong place, wrong time, or associated with the wrong people at some point. Is that right?
Yes.
And I'm not going to get into that, but let me just ask you, did you ever kill anybody?
No.
Did you ever kidnap anybody?
No.
Did you ever sexually assault a child?
No.
That's a witness.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused subject to any potential recall.
Fine with the state.
Good with the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. Who do you have next?
Your Honor, Dr. Specht.
Come up, please, sir. Good morning. Remind you, you're still under oath, okay? Have a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, this witness has been previously sworn to testify truthfully. Mr. Goldman.
Dr. Specht, I'm going to go ahead and hand you Defense Exhibit 48 and Defense Exhibit 68.
Okay.
And let me see if you can identify both of those.
Yes.
Mr. Goldman, I don't know if he's been actually introduced to the jury.
Go ahead and introduce yourself to the jury.
Sure. So my name's Dr. Aaron Specht. I'm an assistant professor at Purdue University with an expertise in exposure assessment and environmental health.
Now we can
Yes, one is my CV, and I haven't seen it printed out before. One is a report I produced for this case.
Okay, do those appear to be true and accurate copies of both of those documents?
Yes.
Now we move to admit both, what were those numbers, 48 and...
What are the
48.
exhibit numbers, Doctor?
48 on my CV and 68 on the report.
Any objection?
No objection, Joe.
Defense Exhibit 48 and Defense Exhibit 68 are admitted.
So now my first question is state your name. So you said your area of expertise is medical, physics, and environmental health?
Yes, medical physics, environmental health, and exposure assessment. Yeah.
Let's back up and go through your education, please.
Okay. So I got my bachelor's degree from Purdue University in physics, and I did my PhD in medical physics in the School of Health Sciences at Purdue University. And then I did a postdoc training at Harvard T.H. Johnston School of Public Health in environmental health and epidemiology.
And what are your areas of research?
My areas of research focus on designing instrumentation to allow us to do environmental measures easier, so looking for environmental contaminants, then applying that into different studies, epidemiological studies, looking at potential health effects associated with those environmental contaminants, and looking at the toxicokinetics and the toxicological features associated with those environmental contaminants, which is essentially just how they go through the body and how they interact.
Okay, hang on. You
Sorry.
talk real fast.
Sorry about that.
All right.
I'll slow it down a bit.
Thank you. Go ahead.
May also need the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah, pull that closer to you.
Is it this one or this
That
one?
That one. Okay.
And does that include research on X-ray fluorescence?
Yeah, so a lot of the instrumentation that I end up developing is focused primarily on X-ray fluorescence work. And so I can explain what X-ray fluorescence kind of is.
Let's come back to that in a minute
Okay.
and just get through the basics first.
Okay.
The qualifications part that we always have to walk through. So let's go to what are your academic appointments right now?
So my main appointment is at Purdue University, where I'm an assistant professor. I have an appointment at the Harvard T.H. Johnston School of Public Health. I'm a visiting scientist there, and I'm also the director of their trace metals lab. So that just means there's a bunch of people who ask questions about metals, and they don't know all that much about it themselves, so they reach out to us, and we guide them through designing the study or which measurements to make, any number of questions.
And have you published any peer-reviewed articles?
Yes, I've published about 70 different peer-reviewed articles. So a peer-reviewed article is something where I design a study and I write it up, and then I'll send it out to a journal who will send it to anonymous reviewers from the scientific community who will then judge what the merit of it is in the context of my scientific field. And then it can get accepted or rejected based off their feedback.
And generally what topics do you cover in your published articles?
So it's the same kind of topics that I do most of my research on. Environmental health, exposure assessment, designing these instruments, all of that.
And have you been asked to be a peer reviewer for any journals in your field?
Oh yeah, more than a dozen.
And are you a member of any professional societies or scholarly organizations?
Yes, so I'm a member of the Society of Toxicology, and I'm actually the vice president for the metals specialty section as part of that. I'm a member of the International Society for Trace Element Research in Humans, and I'm the secretary for the society there. I'm also a member of the Health Physics Society, the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology, and the International Society of Exposure Science.
And have you received any fellowships, research grants, awards, or things like that?
Yeah, so I have funding from the National Institutes of Health. I have some foundation funding. I have funding from the Department of War, from any number of potential federal funders, and also a slew of foundations as well.
Was one of those from the Department of Defense?
Yes, yeah, the Department of War now. But
Okay,
yes.
Department of War. And have you previously testified in court about portable XRF, that X-ray radiofluorescence
Yes.
measurement?
Yes, so I previously testified in the Flint Water Crisis trials related to the lead exposure during that case.
And besides you testifying, have other experts relied upon your findings when they were testifying in court?
Yes, they have.
Now, in that Flint Water Crisis case, how many people did you test for using the portable XRF for that case?
I believe we ended up testing about 12,000 people that were in the community there.
Now, what are the biomarkers for lead exposure?
So the biomarkers that are traditionally used for lead exposure would be like blood. And you probably are familiar with this. If you have kids, they would get a blood screening, and a blood lead level would be given. This is actually a fairly recent measure of what people have been exposed to, because when lead goes into your body, it actually is going to dissipate fairly quickly from blood. The blood is just a car that transports it around the rest of the body. But when it goes in your body, it looks a lot like calcium. And so that's how it does all of these bad things in the body, is it hijacks places that calcium would ordinarily go. So it will pass through the blood-brain barrier and do stuff in your brain. The blood transports it on the red blood cells, which is, normally where that would happen. And as a consequence as well, the lead will actually store primarily in bone, which is where calcium would normally store. So when it gets into the bone, 90% of the ingested lead actually will store in the bone. And then your bone's going to stay there. It's not here today and gone tomorrow. It turns over very, very, very slowly. So when we actually do a measurement, so with our device, we are able to measure bone lead levels instead of blood lead levels. And that bone lead level actually gives us a very cumulative measure of what someone's been exposed to their entire life. And that's important because, lead, it has this impact, and it's going to do something in the brain by passing the blood-brain barrier. But all of our toxicological studies and the general scientific consensus shows that those effects are irreversible. So even though we're going to monitor it with blood, and maybe that will dissipate over time, those effects are going to linger and they're going to stay there for the rest of your life. So when we are able to do a cumulative measure of what someone's been exposed to, that is a more effective measure of what the potential health outcomes are associated with that level of exposure.
So how long would that exposure be detectable in the blood?
In the blood, it normally dissipates fairly quickly within a couple weeks. So the half-life is about 30 days. So that means if you were exposed to something 30 days ago and we measured it today, half of it would still be present in the blood. The equivalent then for bone lead would be 30 years. So if you were exposed to something 30 years ago and we measured it today, half of it would still be present in your bone.
So you mentioned, like, for the blood testing, one way to do it. How do you test for lead in blood?
You can do it a couple different ways. They're really technical analytical chemistry techniques. So one is inductive coupled plasma mass spectrometry, which essentially you digest the blood and you send it through a plasma flame, and then it goes through this magnetic quadrupole system, and it looks for mass to charge ratios, and it identifies a given isotope of lead. The other one, which is much more commonly used because it's much cheaper, is anodic stripping voltammetry, which is, they have these little kits. They call them the lead care kits, and you can drop a piece of blood onto it and then stick it in, and it'll give you a result in about 5 minutes. And those are typically used by health departments when they do your kids' screening. That's what they'll use.
So what about bone testing for lead? How's that done?
Bone testing for lead is always done using X-ray fluorescence. The alternative is we do a bone biopsy. But with the X-ray fluorescence, we can do it non-invasively. So what we do is we have some kind of X-ray source, and we put that on the shin bone. And what it's going to do is it's going to send little X-rays into the bone. And each of those is going to interact on an atom-by-atom basis and make those atoms give off signals that are specific to whatever elements they are. And one of those elements happens to be lead, and we can go back and track it, so see how much lead is there, and then relate that to a concentration based off some normalizations we do for the particular physiology of a given person.
So you're talking about one of the elements. What are some of the other elements you might look for with that same technology?
We can look at iron and zinc and some other toxic elements like mercury, arsenic, and cadmium.
And when was that technology developed?
So we originally started doing these bone lead tests back in the 1970s. And this technology has iterated over time, and we've gotten pretty good at it. since the 1970s. We used these old devices with a radioisotope source, and we got this radioisotope source from a cyclotron that was, we had some sources in the U.S. originally, but right now the only cyclotron was based in Russia, so we can't get that one anymore. But the device itself was about 200 pounds. It used liquid nitrogen cooling for a high pure germanium detector, and it took about 30 minutes to do a measurement.
And what about the portable XRF?
Yeah, so the current device we use is not 200 pounds. It's about 5 pounds. It looks a lot like a barcode scanner. And you can do the same kind of thing. You hold it up to the middle of the shin bone, and you're able to actually determine the elemental content of that bone. And so it's using an X-ray tube source rather than a radioisotope source. And now instead of having that huge 200 pounds of liquid nitrogen, we use a thermoelectric cooler, which is much more compact.
Your Honor, unless there's an objection, I'm just going to put my demonstrators up.
Any objection? No, you don't. Okay.
Okay. So you kind of described these pretty well already, but what are we looking at here?
This is the previous iteration of the X-ray fluorescence devices. So you can see the big liquid nitrogen dewar there. That's where all the liquid nitrogen is stored. The detector on the front, and then that little black dot is actually covering up the radioisotope source on the front of that. And these took about, again, 30-minute measurements. We used these pretty extensively in the 90s and early 2000s with a whole bunch of different cohort studies of lead.
And what's that?
So this is the portable XRF, the one that I use now to do bone lead measurements, and we've used it for the past 15 years or so to do that. It takes about 3 minutes to do the measurement rather than 30 minutes. Again, it has the X-ray tube source, and it's battery operated, so I can take it with me and go into the field and do measurements that way.
And do you know which model that is?
That's a Thermo Fisher XL3T Gold D Plus model.
Is this commercially available?
This is a commercially available device that is traditionally used in industrial settings like mining, but we've adapted it with our research so that we can use it for these types of settings. We basically changed software slightly so that it's able to collect and stay stagnant in a particular mode that gives us the readings we want to see for our bone lead measurements.
You said the software, so like 5 pounds, this is controlled by software, this isn't you just pushing buttons or anything?
No, so the tablet you can see on the device actually has a firmware loaded up, so it has, like some kind of operating system, and you can go through and make adjustments to the system through that.
So you're adjusting the settings, you're not building something from scratch?
Correct.
Okay. And how do you get the data off of that?
So the data is stored locally on the device on a hard drive there, but you can also get it off the device using a USB cable and plugging it into a computer.
So when you take your measurement, you're able to look and see what the data is on the device?
You can see the data on the device, yes, that is correct.
And are there any studies or anything to show that the portable XRF model that you use is accurate, is as accurate as previous generations of XRF?
Oh yes, so we've done dozens of different studies looking at, human in vivo studies where we actually looked at this portable XRF versus the one on the previous slide with the huge liquid nitrogen tank. We've done studies of cadavers where we were able to actually do the measurement and then section off a piece of bone that we would then analyze using a chemistry lab. We've done this in wildlife studies and any number of different settings where we've actually validated that this device is measuring what we think it should be measuring.
Okay. Let's dumb that one down for just a little bit. So if you're wanting to know if the new thing you're trying to measure with, so you get a new plastic ruler, and you want to know if it measures the same as your old wooden ruler.
Yeah,
You're comparing what measurements you get with the wooden ruler to what you get with the plastic ruler, right?
correct.
So
Yep.
you use the old generation and said, what readings did it get? And then use the new generation and see what readings it gets. And if they're the same, that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yep, that is effectively the exact thing we're doing with this.
So like somewhere in the world, there's a rod that tells you what a meter actually length is. And every other meter stick in the world is supposed to match that.
Yes.
Okay. So, but you went further than that and you actually took cadavers, measured them with this, cut a piece of bone out of it for just in layman's terms,
Yep.
dissolve that and saw how much lead was in it and see if that matched.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's how you determine that this particular model works.
Yes.
Have there been studies completed in the United States and internationally to verify how this works? That it does work?
Yeah, so I've done many studies in the U.S. At various universities, Duke University, Harvard University, Boston University, Medical University of South Carolina. I have a study actually at University of Texas, Arlington. And yeah, I have dozens of studies there. On the international stage, I've done measurements in 14 different countries, including Iraq and India and China. I've taken this with me all over the world.
Now, I put some images up of kind of different places, and this kind of just demonstrating how you actually would use it. And we're talking about the tibia bone. Is that the bone we're talking about, the front of the leg?
Yes, yeah, that would be the shin bone, yeah.
So with the portable one, I guess in that middle photo, you see with the portable one, you hold it for 3 minutes, and then the one in the background, you would actually have to be...
You'd be like strapped to the chair
30
for
minutes.
30 minutes.
Okay.
And it was very difficult in that study because we were trying to measure kids, and we watched one movie probably 300 times.
Try to get them to hold still.
Yeah.
Okay. So does the FDA approve using the model of portable XRF on humans?
Yes.
And how is that done?
So it has a 510K clearance, which is essentially saying it's substantially equivalent to something of equal risk.
And is this use of the portable XRF for bone lead measurement recognized by the Center for Disease Control?
Yes. So the CDC, the Environmental Protection Agency, the NIH, they all recognize this technology. And actually, I was a subject matter expert and a reviewer for the Integrated Science Assessment of Lead, which is this huge EPA 2,000-page document that goes through all of the potential impacts of lead in the body, but also, importantly, the exposure assessment. And my role was to look at the toxicology and also measurements of bone.
Now, are you aware of other institutions that are using this same model, XRF, to do bone lead measurement in humans?
Yes, so I've listed some off before, but Duke, Harvard, Boston University, Johns Hopkins is using it for humans. These are all just for humans too. Medical University, South Carolina, Purdue University, Indiana University. I'm forgetting probably a dozen, but.
Can you give me an approximate number how many bone lead measurements have been completed with your device?
With our device alone, probably more than 60,000 measurements have been completed on humans.
And did you examine Tanner Horner?
I did.
Did you review any records in preparation for that examination?
In preparation for the examination, I did not.
Okay. Have you reviewed any records that would reveal potential sources of lead exposure for Tanner?
I believe I saw something that he had some lead paint exposure potentially. And then I heard the testimony this morning about him eating coins. That's problematic for lead exposure.
Well, let's go ahead and skip to that, and tell me about how people get exposed to lead.
Normally, people get exposed to lead through a variety of routes. You can have inhalation, ingestion, or absorption. So primarily inhalation and ingestion being the principal sources of potential exposure. If you think back into the 90s when we had lead in gasoline, we were all exposed to a lot of inhalation sources of lead as everyone was driving cars around that was putting it in the air. I'd say nowadays most of the higher sources of lead are from lead paint or ingesting lead as a kid. And again, this kind of goes hand in hand with the toxicology of it. So when a younger kid gets exposed to an amount of lead, they actually have a greater percentage of having that actually taken up in the body. So the coins went through his body, and maybe some of it came off, but most of it hopefully went through the rest of his body. But that some of it that came off was taken up in the body very, very easily because of his age, versus an adult who would have probably half the amount would actually get taken up in the body. And that goes with a lot of things, and nutritional needs and whatnot, as a growing kid.
And remember when you conducted your exam on Tanner?
I don't remember the exact date. I think it was late last year.
Okay. And was that in the Tarrant County Jail?
The one right over here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was one and the same. I walked by it this morning. I was like, oh, okay, I remember where I am.
Okay. So I assume it was easier to use the portable RF
Yes.
than
Yep.
anything else. All right. So just walk us through what you did to use that with Tanner.
Okay, so the procedure is fairly straightforward. So with the device, we power it on. We have Tanner lift up his pant leg, revealing his shin. And what we do is you set up the software, make sure it's going to operate in the right mode, and you'll align that parallel to his shin bone. So the x-ray tube comes out at a slight angle, so being parallel allows us to go up the bone rather than across and potentially miss. Then when we have it placed correctly, we energize the device, and we essentially just stare at each other for 3 minutes while the device collects its data. Then we turn it off, and the data is collected and stored on the device.
And is that the correct protocol for doing that collection?
Yes, that's the same methodology we've used in every measurement for the past 15 years.
And what were the results of your test?
The test showed that he had been exposed to lead, and it had accumulated in his bone to a degree of an exact measure of 12.1 micrograms of lead per gram bone mineral content. So that unit is the way we've done bone lead measurements since the 1970s, essentially.
And can you kind of put that into context for us? What does that mean?
Yes, so bone lead, again, since it's giving us a cumulative measure of what someone's been exposed to, the important thing is to actually have age-matched control data. So we can look at someone else who's the same age and say, okay, well, this is what they would have had in their bone, because it accumulates and it doesn't go away. So we have a population study we typically use for this, which was based in Toronto. And in that study, the same age group as Mr. Horner would have had about 0.5 micrograms of lead per gram bone mineral. And to put that further into perspective, so his level was 24 times higher than that comparison group, first of all. Secondly, you can do a total body bone, or a total body lead measurement. So because we have this in units of bone mineral content, and everyone has a certain amount of bone mineral content over their body, we can actually determine how much total lead he had in his body. And so that comparison, he came back with about 33,000 micrograms of lead. Quite high, compared to his peers at closer to, I believe, 1,500 micrograms of lead.
Okay, and are you aware of how many micrograms of lead it would take to potentially have an effect on someone?
So the CDC sets this level of blood lead, that is the level of concern, and it's at 3.5 micrograms per deciliter. And we actually show that there is harm at lower levels, and the CDC, the Environmental Protection Agency, the World Health Organization, every scientific organization of merit has said that no level of lead is good for you. But if we do the same total body estimate with that 3.5 micrograms per deciliter, you get to about 250 micrograms of lead as the dose that can cause harm. And so 250 micrograms, very different than 33,650 micrograms.
And I know you said this, but just to clarify, when we're talking about the group that we're comparing it to, it would make a difference in age because you were talking about lead being more prevalent in society, and if you lived in the 70s, you'd have more exposure. So is that why you have to break it to age groups?
Yeah, that's essentially it. So if you're older, maybe you had the exposure from the 90s when you were inhaling the leaded gasoline that was being combusted. And so we'd have to account for that. So that's why we do that age comparison, because this is going to be reflective of what you were exposed to in your life. So you have to do an age match control.
And so over time, has that data kind of been updated? You said you were using the Toronto study. Is there a reason why you use that one?
The Toronto study is the most recent study with age-matched control data that we have. There was previous studies from the 90s, but that would be irrelevant because back in the 90s, we had so many other sources of lead exposure in our bodies that it wasn't going to, be as significant as a difference.
And so, to summarize, what is your opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
So my opinion is that Mr. Horner experienced a significant amount of lead exposure that would have impacted his health, and particularly his neurological health.
I'll pass the witness, John.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. A couple of questions about, Dr. Specht, about this particular device that you're using. It's called a XL3T Gold, is that correct?
Yes, that's
And
correct.
it's made by Thermo Fisher,
Yes.
okay? And this particular device, and you said that you had some FDA, what was the number you used on the FDA?
510K.
And what do you have from Thermo Fisher giving you authority or direction in using this on humans?
So Thermo Fisher doesn't market the device for these types of tests. We actually do the modifications to the device to allow it to be able to be used on humans. So Thermo Fisher doesn't actually have the approvals needed to go through that process.
So the manufacturer of this device does not approve this device for use on humans, is that correct?
They only have it for the billions of dollars they make for mining and whatnot.
I'm going to ask you again. They don't approve it for use on humans.
They do not sell it for that purpose, no.
Now, as we talked about this, you indicated that your final opinion is that Mr. Horner had a significant lead exposure. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you talked about the coins being an issue, right?
Yes.
And as part of your review for this case, Can you point to anything in his medical records where he had some form of lead toxicity?
I'm not a doctor, and I did not review his medical records.
Right, but you've made some opinions here about people getting significant exposures and the results of those exposures, have you not?
Yes.
Okay. And with regard to that, if somebody has lead toxicity at some point, that's something that's going to be needed to be treated by a doctor, right?
Not necessarily. So we have a couple treatments for high lead exposure. And primarily the one treatment we use often is called chelation treatment. And so this is really the only intervention we have when it comes to high levels of exposure. And so chelation essentially would go into the blood, and it would pull out any amount of metals, just general metals though, it's not just lead. So they only use it in cases where there's really high exposures. But again, that focuses primarily on the blood.
And you don't have anything that you can point to in Mr. Horner's history wherein he received any type of chelation treatment?
No, I cannot.
And you would have said that at some point he received I'm going to make a presumption here, you help me with this, a pretty high dose of lead at some point in his childhood, is that right?
Yes, he would have had to have had some exposure to lead during his childhood to accrue this amount of cumulative lead dose.
Now, you said some exposure. Now, I'm looking at your numbers here, and at 24 times higher, that doesn't seem to me to be just some exposure. That seems to be a pretty massive exposure.
Yes, that would be a pretty massive exposure.
Okay. And I know you're not a medical doctor, but a massive exposure like that, is that potentially lethal?
If it was all at once, it could be, but the lethality associated with blood lead levels varies quite a lot by individual. So I've reviewed some cases before where individuals have had blood lead levels of greater than 100 micrograms per deciliter, and they still haven't passed away yet.
Okay. So these numbers that we're talking about here, you said that his level is 12.1 micrograms, and what it should be is 0.5 micrograms. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's where you get that 24 times or 2,400% number.
Yes.
Right. So one of my questions to you is at that level, how is it that Mr. Horner is still walking around and not having some effect from that? How is that possible?
Well, I'm not claiming that he doesn't have any effect from it. He does have an effect from it.
But at that level, at that massive a level that we're talking about, how is he still alive?
So there's levels, there's scales to the amount of exposure needed. The dose is what's really dependent, and when the dose happened over time. Again, the lead is going to come into the body and it's going to have some irreversible impacts, but the lethality of it is really dependent on how fast that happens.
Okay. And you said something about you tested a bunch of people in Flint that had a water crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Were they as high as Mr. Horner at 12.1, or were they lower as an average?
I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but on average they were lower.
Okay. So the people in Flint who drank from all that contaminated water for, I would assume 30, 40, 50 years, is that right? Potentially?
No, the Flint Water Crisis was they did have lead pipes, but they swapped the water source, and that led to a huge amount of leaching of lead into their water system.
Right, and these people were exposed to it for a fairly long period of time, were they not?
Not that long, not 30 years or 10 years or even 5 years in some cases.
But their levels were lower than Mr. Horner's.
Yes.
Now, what I'm trying to figure out here a little bit is you said something about, and I'm not a scientist, I'm going to have you help me here.
Yeah.
is that he had a total lead amount of 33,650 micrograms in his body.
Yes.
Okay, I want to talk about that number.
Okay.
You're telling me that there is that many micrograms physically located in his body?
Yes. Integrated into his bone.
Okay, so let me just put this on a scale and ask you, 33,650 micrograms. I'm not a scientist. Is that a, I mean, I'm just looking at something here. Is that a cupful?
No.
Okay. And in fact, do you know the conversion to grams? How many grams that would be in his system?
0.03.
0.03365?
It'd be 33,000 times 1 e to the minus 6. So,
I'm going to trust you on that.
I don't know if I trust myself on that, but
All right. So I guess my question is 0.03 grams. So if we were to extract it all out of his body, 0.03 grams, I mean, is it as much as this right here? Is that 0.03? How much is 0.03 grams?
it doesn't seem like very much. But again, this is something, we ingest a lot of it, and maybe a lot of it's going to pass through our body. But this is stuff that's actually been incorporated into our body. And so it doesn't take all that much to cause harm. And in terms of the toxicology of this, we know, so this was actually just the bone content. But the bone content, you're not super worried about the bone content. In toxicological studies, we have shown that the bone is a good corollary for what is actually in the brain as well. So we can use this as a determining factor. Okay, well then his brain was exposed to this amount over some amount of time as well. And that's more impactful.
Right. I'm just trying to figure this out. I'm trying to figure out how much is it. I mean, 0.03 grams, is that like a BB? Is that what we're talking about? That's the total amount?
It could be on the same order, yeah.
Okay, so something, we're talking in the entirety of his whole body, something like this.
Yes, but it's actually incorporated into his body. And again, it's 24 times higher than what any one of his peer groups would have been exposed to.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Recorrect.
Briefly. So you mentioned before that, I guess, the CDC, the EPA, the Department of War, Duke, Johns Hopkins, I think you said the Medical College of South Carolina, Purdue University, a bunch of places do use this portable device to detect bone lead in here.
Yes, yeah.
And we talked before about other experts relying on your findings. I assume those experts are relying on those findings because lead did have an effect on the person.
Yes, exactly.
And we're talking about a BB, I guess that's the size of a pill too, and those can have effects on people.
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. State.
Yes. One last question here. You talked about the normal test that a doctor would do would be a blood test. And you said that goes out of their system in how long?
So the half-life is about 30 days, yeah. And they do the blood test, again, primarily because the only treatment available is acting in the blood.
Right. And so it wouldn't surprise you if Tanner Horner's medical records indicated he tested essentially negative for blood when he got tested, would you?
No, it wouldn't surprise me necessarily, depending on when that test occurred versus when he was actually exposed.
But at this level that what you're talking about here, this extreme level, this massive amount of lead, according to you, in his system, how is it possible that with this much lead, according to you, in his system, that he still tests zero?
Well, I mean, it could easily have been, tested at very different time points in his life. So if you test blood lead level very recently and he was exposed when he was 2 or 3, then the blood test could come back effectively zero. And again, this is effectively zero because even those blood tests aren't 100% accurate.
That's what it's wrong.
Nothing further.
I'm sorry?
Nothing further.
May this witness be finally excused?
Yes, sir.
Good to stay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Hand me those exhibits. Okay, we're gonna get lunch on the way for you, okay? And so, enjoy it, and we'll see you back this afternoon, okay? All rise. One o'clock, everybody.
I mean, I couldn't ask anybody.
Judge,